Mom, here's a letter from Grandpa. The day my father-in-law, a wealthy man who had always snubbed me, died. As I was preparing for the funeral, my 4-year-old daughter, who was exploring the house, handed me a white envelope. The envelope was indeed addressed to my name. My stepfather, who has always hated me, wrote me a letter. When I opened the letter, what I found was a shocking fact that I could not believe. After reading the letter, I impulsively called the police. When the police officer arrived 15 minutes later, he was stunned and muttered, "I'm sorry, but I can't believe it." It's too late. My name is Letha Boyley. I am 32 years old, and I am raising my 4-year-old daughter Mary. Although Marielle is a bit of tomboy, she attended kindergarten and grew up to be a good, honest girl. I met my husband Duke at the real estate company, where I worked when I was single. I was just an employee when Duke, the vice president of the company, took an interest in me, and the company's president was my father-in-law. In other words, Duke was the president's son. Thanks to this, Duke's income was quite high and we were financially well off. We have a good relationship with our family, and our life is smooth sailing. But I had one big problem. My father-in-law, Perkin Boyle, who lived a short distance from us. My 75-year-old father-in-law is a wealthy man who has been involved in various businesses in addition to being the president of a real estate company. My mother-in-law was killed in an accident a year before we got married, but she has been living alone in a mansion near our house ever since. It seemed that my father-in-law did not like me. Doak had told me that he had a bad heart condition, so I was worried about him and often visited him at his house, but he tutors me every time. "Stay away from me. Get out of here." I was often told to stay away from my father-in-law's house with his harash attitude. Even when I went to his house, he wouldn't even make eye contact with me. One day, this happened. Father-in-law, Doak gave me some snacks as a business trip souvenir. "Would you like to eat?" I brewed a cup of tea with a smile and put the fine confectionery on the table. However, my father-in-law glared at me and strode over to me and briskly brushed the tea away. I screamed as the tea fell over and spilled. However, my father-in-law grabbed the confectionery and smashed it into the trash. "Oh, father-in-law, what are you doing?" I protested, but my father-in-law said, "I don't want this. Just go home," and he pushed me back and kicked me out of the house. Then, when Marielle's 4th birthday was approaching, I said, "Father-in-law, we are going to have a birthday party for Marielle soon. Would you like to join us?" I asked my father-in-law timidly, but he yelled at me again, "Don't invite me to such a silly party." He yelled at me again. I remembered that my father-in-law looked at Marielle in a kind way, and in fact, he never said anything mean about her. That's why I invited him to my birthday party, but he refused in such a way. In the end, Marielle's birthday was celebrated by me, Doak, and me. However, soon after that, I received a thick registered mail for sending cash from my father-in-law. There was no letter or anything attached to it, but I wondered it was meant as a birthday gift for Marielle. What in the world was your father-in-law thinking? I have no idea what that man was up to. To be honest, I had a hard time with my difficult father-in-law. When I honestly told this to Duke, he looked troubled. My father has always had a twisted personality, you know. I appreciate your concern, but I wonder if I've done something to make them hate me. No, you don't. Anyway, he's difficult. You don't have to get too involved. Okay. I took Duke's words to heart and stopped visiting my in-laws so often. For some reason, only Marielle, who is very fond of her father-in-law, would beg to see her grandfather, which was a problem for me. Grandpa is very kind. He would pet me and even secretly gives me sweets. But I can't imagine such things from my father-in-law's usual attitude. I don't remember my father-in-law ever being strict with Marielle, but I just let her off the hook, thinking that she was just saying what she thought was appropriate because he was a child. And even if my father-in-law was really nice to Marielle, I would be the one who would be yelled at and harmed, so I was reluctant to go to that house. However, one day, while I was leading such a life, a shocking thing had happened. My father-in-law suddenly passed away. According to the housekeeper who found him, He had already gone at home when she found him. When Doak returned home with the news, he turned pale and mumbled. Dad seemed fine when I saw him during the day. I was upset, but as his wife, I had to be as helpful as possible. Doak was going to the police station to see to the visual confirmation, so I took Mariel to my parents-in-law's house to prepare for the funeral. I was busy looking up relatives to contact and who to contact, but Mariel, who had a curious and unruly personality, began to explore the in-laws by herself. I told her, "Don't do anything dangerous," and prepared for his funeral. Then, after a while, Mariel came running to me. "Mom, here's a letter from Grandpa." I looked at Mariel's hand and saw a white envelope in her hand. It was addressed to Letha in my father-in-law's handwriting. "Where did you get this, Mariel?" "I found it when I was exploring the closet in my grandfather's room." Mariel replied cheerfully and went off to continue her exploration again. My stepfather, who hated me, wrote me a letter. What on earth could it be? I opened the letter and found a shocking revelation that was hard to believe. As I read it, I felt myself turned white. With trembling hands, I turned to the second page of the letter and read it. "I'm grateful to Letha for taking care of me. Mariel is also my sweet granddaughter. I'm sorry I had to be that way to keep you away, but the time we spent together was such a blessing to me. Thank you so much." Such is the end of my father-in-law's letter. I impulsively called the police with it clutched in my hand. I held my racing heart and waited, and 15 minutes later, the neighborhood police officer arrived. And when he finished reading my father-in-law's letter, which I handed to him silently, he mumbled in a voice that sounded as if it was about to disappear. "Oh, it's too late." I asked the frustrated police the reason for his words. Actually, I was also consulted by Mr. Perkin. The police, whose name is Russo, was a familiar face to my father-in-law, and whenever he met him, they would make small talk. He told us about a consultation he had received from my father-in-law. It was about my mother-in-law, who had passed away 6 years earlier, and all I could do was stand there with my eyes wide open in shock. "I'll do whatever I can. You should get a hold of yourself." With these words, the police officer returned to the police station. I was now alone, and with trembling hands, I was rereading the letter from my father-in-law when I realized something. There was another piece of paper in the envelope. Just as I was checking the contents of the letter, I heard the front door open and realized that my husband had returned. I quickly hid the letter and managed to keep a calm face as I greeted him. "Welcome home. How was the visual confirmation?" Apparently, the reason my father became like that was because he had a chronic illness and mistakenly took a medicine he shouldn't have. He said, that's how he had his heart attack. Well, it was an accident. Oh my God. It's a shame that my father's carelessness could have caused all this. "Letha, I know you're going to have a hard time with the funeral and all, but I'm counting on you." "Yeah, okay." Duac says this as he undoes his tie, as if he is tired. As I gazed at my husband, I clenched my fists and secretly made up my mind. I had to make sure that the regret of my father-in-law written in this letter would be avenged. 2 days later, on the day of my father-in-law's funeral, my father-in-law had few relatives, and the mourners were all from the company. But when I saw how many people mourned him, I realized that he was in fact a man who was loved by many people. And that night I stayed up all night working on a certain task without Doak and Mariel, who were sleeping in the other room. No. The next day, Doak and I and Mariel returned home for the first time in several days. Doak glanced at the trash cans, which were full to the brim, and muttered to himself, "I've been so busy that I forgot to take out the trash. I'm sorry. Today is rubbish day. I'll take it out right away." "No, you're tired. There's garbage in the reading room, so I'll take it out." Doak had never volunteered to take out the trash before. Doak grabbed a garbage bag and headed for his study. I followed him, trying not to make a sound with my footsteps, and through the crack in the door of his study, I witnessed what I had imagined. And as soon as he left to take out the trash, I took out my cell phone and made a call to a certain place. I stopped Doak, who had just returned from taking out the trash and was about to get dressed and go to work. "Hey, is there anything you want to say to me about your father?" Duac was busily getting ready for work, and would not make eye contact with me. "What?" "Nothing. I don't have anything to say," I said quietly, clenching my fists tightly. "No, I want to talk about what caused your mother's disappearance." "Why are you talking about my mother now? What are you suddenly going to say?" Duak seemed a little upset, and only at this point did he finally look at me. "I got a letter from your father and I know everything. Even the resident advisor was consulted by your father." Dok's eyes widened in surprise, and I began to tell him what I had heard. What the police had been told by my father-in-law was that Dok was not his mother-in-law's biological child, but a stranger who had been adopted by his mother-in-law. He also told me that his mother-in-law had died in a suspicious accident soon after the adoption, and that his father-in-law had always suspected Dok. The letter said the same thing. Doak is receiving a legacy from the loss of his wife. There is no doubt that he adopted her for her money. When I finished, Dok's eyes widened as if he was upset, but he soon broke into a half-smile as if he was mocking me. "With my father gone, the company is in a flurry of activity. You're about to become the wife of the company president, aren't you? Why don't you stop talking nonsense and try to support your husband?" I couldn't help but yell out loud when I heard it. "What are you talking about? The president's wife? Don't be silly." Duke was startled by the devilish look on my face. Before he could talk anything back, Marielle, who was in the next room, yelled out, "Whoa, police cars, and there's a lot of them." Hearing this, Duke turned pale. "Oh, you don't mean you called the police?" "Yes, I had rushed to call the police on my cell phone before the garbage truck arrived after confirming that my husband had gone to the dump. Your faith's letter said, after my wife, I will be the next turn. And if I ever suddenly go to the heaven, it will surely be because of Dok's trickery." Doak said, "That's all you called the police for? You have no proof." "I called the police as soon as I saw you throwing away the pills that caused your father to be gone in the study when you said you were taking out the trash. You have proof that I gave him those pills?" "The pills were mine and had nothing to do with my father's case." Duak lost his usual calm demeanor. He snapped and yelled at me. I silently confronted him with the screen of my cell phone. "This is footage from the surveillance cameras your father had planted all over the house. That the third letter I found after the police had left," he said. "I had put surveillance cameras in the house just in case. If anything happens to me, I want you to check it out, and it was written how to check it out." I had spent the night checking the cameras while Duke and Marielle slept in the other room on the night of the farewell ceremony. I checked and found a perfect shot of you in the kitchen putting pills into your father's drink he usually drinks. Of course, I will submit this to the police as evidence as well." My husband shouted, "Stop." My husband was so furious that he turned red and tried to take the phone out of my hand. But at that moment, the front door opened and many police officers rushed in. "Hey, I found it," I heard a voice saying from the dumpster. "We need to talk to you about Mr. Perkin Boyle. Can you also tell us about the drugs we just found in the trash?" Behind the detective who was pressing Duke with a stern face, there was Mr. Russo, the police, standing there with a straight face. I am sure he was the one who encouraged the detective to do so. Duke became furious and shouted at me, "If you had just kept quiet, you would have become a very wealthy man. Why are you doing this to me?" At that moment, in my mind were the words of gratitude my father-in-law had left me in a letter, and the kind look he had given Marielle came back to me. I checked the surveillance camera, and while I was in the kitchen preparing snacks, I saw my father-in-law sitting on the living room sofa, lovingly stroking Marielle's head on his lap. My father-in-law really did love Marielle, as she said. To treat such a kind man like that, I can never forgive him. This is a revenge for my father-in-law. Atone for your sins. Damn it. Knox stared at me without any sign of remorse until the very end, and then he was taken away by the police. Doak was later convicted. After interrogation, he confessed that he had targeted his father's property. The case against my mother-in-law is also being reopened, so he will not be coming out of the prison for a while. I asked for a lawyer and was able to successfully divorce Doak. I have no intention of ever having anything to do with that horrible man again. When it became clear that Doak had taken my father-in-law's life, he lost his inheritance rights, which meant that Marielle, the eldest of the daughter, would receive his estate. The company was given to a raided party, but thanks to my father-in-law's huge inheritance, we will have no trouble making ends meet in the future. As the best I can do, Marielle and I visit my parents-in-law's gravesite every year and pray for him every day.
The place Dad and a womaness are going to stay is going to burn down. Don't. My daughter suddenly said this to my husband, who was about to go on a business trip for a night or two. It's your fault for raising her to be such a disgusting child. My husband looked at her for a moment, but then quickly left the house. However, as I was looking at my cell phone that night, something incredible popped into my eyes. Please watch as my husband ignores the words of his daughter, who has a mysterious power and will regret it for the rest of his life. My name is Christina Odom. I have been married for 8 years and am raising my 6-year-old daughter Tamara. I met my husband Lovell as a senior and junior colleague at the company where I worked when I was single. Lovell was a good communicator and a bit of a prude, but he was a good performer in the sales department and was popular with both men and women in the company. I became attracted to him, and I remember how happy I was when Lovell asked me to go out with him. After 2 years of dating, he proposed to me, and at his request, I became a full-time housewife after marriage. Soon after that, I was pregnant with our daughter, but my husband did not do any housework or childcare. After the baby was born, I was exhausted and tearfully pleaded with him. I still don't have time to take care of Mirai. Tamara still needs a lot of help. Will you help me with the housework and babysit a little? My husband, who had been a gentleman before we were married, replied in a decidedly uncooperative manner, "What are you talking about? You're a housewife, right? It's natural for you to do the housework and childcare by yourself." "No, I don't care about the housework, but childcare is something we both do." "Are you going to make me change her diapers?" "I don't want to do that." "Just shut up and do what you have to do. Don't complain to me anymore." When I tried to talk to him about it, he wouldn't take it seriously, and I gave up and thought, maybe that's just the way men are. It was difficult to do all the housework and childcare by myself without the help of my husband. But my daughter Tamara was growing up so fast that she was so cute that it didn't hurt to look her in the eye. However, while raising Tamara, I managed to have a strange experience. It must have been around the time Tamara turned 3 years old. As usual, we were going to go shopping together at a nearby supermarket, but on that day, Tamara cried out that she did not want to go. Normally, she would follow me with sparkling eyes, hoping that I might buy her some snacks. I tried to distract her with sweets and stuffed animals, but she cried and said, "I won't go. I don't want to go." I had no choice but to give up shopping that day and stay home. Then I learned on the evening TV news that there had been an accident in my neighborhood in which a runaway car had crashed into the sidewalk. The time and place of the accident was exactly on my usual path to shopping. If I had left the house with Tamara at that time, I could have been involved in a tragic accident. I looked at her with a chill down my spine, but she just smiled and laughed. Even after that, she would sometimes speak as if she could see what was going to happen. She often predicts sudden changes in the weather or tells us about small problems. A year ago, when I met my mother, who lives far away, for the first time in a long time, after I left my mother, she repeatedly appealed to me, saying, "I saw a black blur on my grandmother's breast. We have to go to the hospital." Later, I even hid from my mother that she had said so and recommended a medical checkup, which revealed early-stage lung cancer. Maybe she has some mysterious power. I gradually began to think so, and even told my husband about it, but he, who hates occult stories, just laughed it off. "No way, don't tell anyone else, because they'll think you're crazy." I nodded vaguely at his words and did not tell anyone around me about her powers. I felt that it was better to keep this matter to myself so that she would not be looked at in a strange. She is now 6 years old. She started going to elementary school this spring. But it was around that time that my husband started coming home late and not being home on weekends. He started coming home late and was not home on weekends. Up until that point, he had gone out together only on the weekends and provided family services, but even that he had stopped abruptly. After months of this, I decided to ask him, "Hey, just doing away from home a lot lately. Are you busy at work?" "I've been busy working on a new business venture. I'm working hard to develop new business." "But can't you just stay at home with Tamara a little longer?" "Even when you're at home, you always check on your phone." Then his eyes changed. He stared at me with a bright red face and suddenly started yelling at me. I'm working for your living. You guys are the ones who will be out on the street if I can't work." When I was startled into silence, he continued as if to spit at me. "If you understood what I said, just shut up and don't say anything about my job, okay?" He ended the discussion unilaterally and went to the bedroom in a bad mood, hitting everything around him. It is true that a sales job is not a leisurely one. However, it is strange to have to work so hard that he can't take a day off on weekends for months at a time. In addition, his attitude was unnatural in any way I can think of, such as carrying his cell phone without taking it off his skin and suddenly becoming fashionable. From then on, I began to suspect him of cheating on me. However, even if he was cheating on me, I had no hard evidence, and as a housewife, I did not have the money to hire a professional. In the meantime, I honestly told a classmate of mine who was a good friend of mine when I worked there that I suspected my husband was cheating on me, and I messaged my friend to let me know if she found out anything. While I was agonizing over this, an incident occurred. That day, my husband said he was going on a business trip for 1 night and 2 days. For some reason, my husband was in a good mood and ready to go the day before. I had a hunch that he was going out with his partner, but I had no proof and could not speak to him. Tamara and I went out the front door to see him off as he put on his shoes with an excited look on his face. "Well, I'm off on a business trip, Tamara. Be a good girl." I was about to hand my bag to my husband and say, "Have a safe trip," when suddenly Tamara, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "The place Dad and a womaness are going to stay is going to burn down. Don't..." Silent for a moment. Tamara had tears in her eyes and a serious expression on her face. It was my husband who broke the silence. Hey, what are you talking about? You're saying crazy things." He laughed through his nose, but there was a hint of impatience in his expression. You might be." "Oh, do you have something to complain about? It's your fault for raising her to be such a disgusting child. What are you saying to Tamara? Take those words back." "Shut up. It's time for me to go. You better educate her properly." My husband left in exasperation, and I stood there in a daze. I looked at Tamara, who was standing there, tears streaming down her face. What am I going to do when my dad is in so much trouble? I was tormented by anxiety as I tried to comfort her as she continued to cry. Whenever she says something like this, something is bound to happen. But I did not know what to do with my husband, who would not listen to me. At that night, after putting her to bed, I was watching the internet news when a fire broke out at a resort hotel in a neighbouring prefecture. I turned on the TV and saw a TV broadcast of the scene just as it was happening. The building was on fire from the 2nd floor, and evacuees were running outside one after another in a panic. As I was watching the scene, an onlooker said to me, "Hey, it looks like they're going to jump down there." And the camera turned in that direction. There, a man and a woman are jumping out of a window of a room to take shelter. Moreover, the two seemed to be wearing almost nothing. I was astonished when I saw the expressions on the faces of the man and woman. There they were, my husband and a woman I didn't know. They were both looking distraught, embracing each other, hands on the windowsill, peering down. The fire was coming violently closer to them. The live broadcast cut out just as the two determined men were about to jump out of the window, clad in all their finery. But I could not get rid of the vivid image of them. At that moment, my cell phone rang in my sweaty hands. I opened it to find a message from a former friend of mine with whom I had previously discussed my husband's situation. There is a rumour of Lovell in the company that he is having an affair with a new employee. It seems they both took a paid day off today. I could clearly feel the blood rushing to my head. My hands were shaking and my face was getting hot. I knew he was cheating on me. I will never forgive him. While I was shocked by the shocking images I had just seen, my anger at him for cheating on me and betraying us prevailed. I immediately left Tamara in the care of my sister, who lived nearby, and headed alone to the emergency room in the next prefecture. When I was taken to the hospital room where he was, I found him there in considerable pain, with severe burns on his upper body and his lower body in a cast. "Christina, you came?" He came into the hospital room, noticed me and spoke to me. The hotel where I was travelling on business caught fire, and I jumped off the 3rd floor to escape. In addition to my burns, I was badly injured. He said, like that, weakly. I smiled gently, trying to keep my composure. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. The doctor said you have a spinal injury and will probably have permanent damage. I may not be able to walk, and if that happens, you'll take care of me, right?" Well, you're my wife, so you're supposed to take care of me." "Well, I'm really glad we're married," I said to my husband, who for some reason was very proud of me, with a blank expression on my face. "But it wasn't the hotel on the business trip that caught fire, was it? You must be mistaken about the hotel where you were on your flirtatious trip." He then became visibly impatient and said, "That can't be true." And he denied it. So I confronted him with the screen of my cell phone. Then what is this? There was the image of my husband and his lover about to jump off the 3rd floor in the same state as they had been born. He, perhaps seeing the image for the first time, rolled his eyes and looked at it as if he were devouring it, then muttered, "Hey, what the hell is this?" They were showing the scene of the fire on TV. You guys are already internet celebrities as the couple who jumped out of a fire in the middle of the night, right? What? I guess this video has already been seen by over 100,000 people. I smiled and said to him, and his face turned paler and paler, and he began to shake and tremble. It can't be happened. You can't walk out of the house if a video like this gets around." "But it's true that you were cheating on me, aren't you? It's clearer than daylight in this video, isn't it?" He bit his lip and reluctantly admitted that he had been unfaithful. He kept making excuses like, "I just got carried away," or "it was just a one-time thing. I can't stay married to you after you show me this." He gets a scowling look on his face and says, "Christina, I'm divorcing you. I will of course take custody of the child." My husband's face turned bright red and he attacked me. "If you divorce me, Tamara will has a single parent. How will you, as a housewife, manage to live with a child? I don't need a father telling his daughter she's disgusting. If I work, I can support at least one of my daughters. I will divorce you for sure." We continued to argue vehemently, but my husband became impatient when I did not change my attitude no matter what he said and started shouting, "Oh no, divorce! Don't do it. If that happens, who's going to take care of me in the future? I could get burned so badly, I might not even be able to walk." I told my husband with a straight face as we prepared to leave. "Tamara warned you, didn't she? You betrayed your family, so you deserve everything you get. You're on your own at best." I left my husband nodding and went to leave the hospital room. Please, Christina, don't go." I turned around in the doorway and called out to my husband, who was sobbing and crying, his face covered in tears and snot. "Oh, Lovell, I forgot to tell you. Christina, you reconsidered. I'm demanding $30,000 in alimony for the affair and child support fee, and I want you to pay it up front." I left the hospital room this time, leaving my husband screaming. After that, my husband and I were divorced. The $30,000 alimony was transferred immediately, and child support was paid on a monthly basis. My ex-husband was treated and somehow recovered to the point where he could walk. However, the after effects remained and he lost the ability to function as a man. I don't know if that was the cause, but he broke up with the woman he was having an affair with, who was also badly burned, and she went back to the countryside. He returned to work at one point, but eventually resigned because it became difficult for him to stay after that video was circulated. He is now living in a shabby apartment in a distant city, working part-time day and night. I, on the other hand, used the alimony I received to move out and start a life together with Tamara. Immediately after the divorce was finalized, I saw some numbers in her drawing, so I somehow bought a lottery ticket with those numbers and won a large sum. Thanks to this, I was able to save enough money to live without any problems in the future. Her mysterious remarks like that are becoming less and less common these days because she has grown up. Still, she is my sweet daughter. I hope to continue to watch her growth from the closest point of view.
I didn't want this. My 10-year-old son suddenly smashed a video game console that my husband had given him as a birthday present onto the floor. "Stop it." I was so surprised that I yelled out to stop him, but my husband's face turned red, and he looked as if he was about to punch me. What was going on when it was my son himself who wanted a very popular and hard-to-find video game console? I tried to take the console away by force, but he locked himself in his room. "Come out of the room right now and apologize." I try to force the door of the room open, but it is locked and there is nothing I can do. A while later, he came out of his room, and in his hand he held a piece that had been cruelly dismembered. He said, "Even this. Can you blame me?" As soon as my husband saw what my son held out to him, he turned pale and began to tremble. Danger, skewing on. It was far beyond my imagination. "My name is Teresa. I am 37 years old, and I met my husband, Chaz, who is 5 years older than me, at work, and we got married 12 years ago. We had a son soon after that, and he's just celebrated his 10th birthday recently. My son Kurt was not much of a handful from the time he was a baby, and although it was my first time raising a child, I was able to raise him without difficulty. When I am cooking, which is my passion, he comes next to me and helps me peel vegetables. Not only that, he is a very kind boy who actively helps me with cleaning. He has loved playing with machines since he was a child, and with a twinkle in his eye, he told me about his dream of becoming an engineer who makes parts for airplanes and spaceships in the future. Kurt usually never asks us to buy anything, but he has been wanting a video game console, which is very popular and hard to find. My husband found it through an acquaintance and bought it for Shohei as a birthday present, which led to an extraordinary situation. This is what you've wanted. Now you can hook it up to the TV in the living room and play anytime you want. Yay. My son's expression suddenly clouded over as he opened the wrapping paper with a happy smile and took the game console out of the box. "What the hell is this?" "Why? Isn't this the console you wanted?" "Yes, but I don't need this thing." My son suddenly raised the game console and smashed it onto the floor. I then said, "Don't do that. How dare you do this to him after Daddy bought it for you?" My son, who usually obeys me immediately, looked very scared. "Whatever. I'm not buying you anything anymore." When my angry-looking husband tried to rob my son, Kurt prevented him from doing so and locked himself in his room. I tried to open the door, but it was locked and there was nothing I could do. "Come out now." My husband yelled at me while I was confused and wondering what the hell was going on. "Your poor discipline is the reason for his delinquency." "I'm not kidding at all. It was so expensive." After that, My husband continued to nag at me, accusing me of not being obedient and of poor discipline. Kurt, what's wrong with you? Please come out of here. My son's sudden attitude and my husband's words made me anxious and my heart was racing. I repeatedly knocked on the door of my son's room, who did not even answer, and as I called out to him, he finally came out of his room after a while, and there in his hand was the remnants of a game. I didn't buy it for you to break it into pieces. Don't you ever think you can get away with anything? Apologize properly to your father. Then he handed me a small piece that looked like a round coin. You're mad that Daddy put this in my game console. What? What do you mean? My husband's face, which had been full of anger until a moment ago, turned pale gradually. I thought he was feeling ill, and when I tried to speak to him, my son said something outrageous. He said, Dad, this is a bug, isn't it? What? Staring at my husband clamming up, my son blurted out the entire contents of his husband's bag. Inside was a receiver shaped like a small radio. I thought it was odd because it was supposed to be brand new, but the sticker was off and I could see scratches on the side of the console from when it was opened. I thought you might stop studying once you get this, so I installed it to observe you. I could see that my normally imposing husband was clearly upset and trembling. He took a gulp of water from the table and began to wipe off the sweat dripping down his forehead. You're worried about Kurt, but this is too much. You look like a criminal. Shut up. Don't talk nonsense. My husband never admitted his fault. I went to bed at night, but I couldn't sleep at all as many things kept popping into my head. He said it was for Kurt's sake, but planting a bug was too much. There must be some other reason. Unable to sleep, I sat in the living room drinking coffee and reflecting on today's events when my son sat down in front of me. I'm sorry you had to go through that on your birthday. What's done is done. But there is something else that's been bothering me. Kurt sat back down next to me, looking at me intensely and whispered to me as if he was trying to have a private conversation with me. There may be other listening devices in the house, so I'll whisper just in case. Okay, do you have any idea what's going on? Dad's been coming home late for the past 2 months, right? Actually, it was something that had been bothering me as well. My husband, who had always come home on time in the past, suddenly said he had become busy with work 2 months ago and started coming home in the middle of the night more often. I think he wanted to know how you were doing, not just me. I was thinking the same thing. If the game console is always in the living room, he can always watch how we are doing. But I don't know what he was trying to do that for. I think you should check our house out just in case. I was surprised at my son's mature comment, even though he was only 10 years old, but I was glad that he was concerned about me. He's going to play golf tomorrow, right? Maybe we can look into it during that time. I was surprised at how concrete his plan was, as he seemed to have already thought about where to look. I'm such a pathetic parent to let my child worry about me like this. No, you're not. You're just being honest. I hope Daddy isn't acting crazy. I feel so bad for my son, whose eyes are glazed over while looking down. I'm sure he is just like me and really wants to trust that man. That's why I have to find out the truth so that I can eliminate the mistrust I have now. I decided to thoroughly investigate my husband for the sake of my son. The next day, I behaved as usual, sent my husband off to play golf, and immediately my son called me upstairs to his study. He said, "Let's talk here since Daddy won't bug his own study." My son then started up my husband's computer and typed in something, and there was my husband's activity history displayed. How do you know all this? It's so easy. It's all in the map on his cell phone. I looked at the information on the screen with admiration. He always comes straight home from work to our condo, doesn't he? Yes, but isn't the time odd? I looked closely and found that he returned to his apartment at 7:00 p.m. But it is usually midnight when he actually returns home. Where on earth is he during that time? Kurt thought for a moment, then clapped his palms together as if he had just thought of something. Let's plant a GS on Dad. I was a little perplexed by this suggestion, but I couldn't think of a better way. The other day, I found one for sale at a local secondhand store, and I got the GPS the same day and put it in the pocket of my husband's bag which he usually uses for work. We'll see how things go for a while with it. Just like this, we began to explore my husband's inexplicable behavior. As I observed, my husband arrives at our apartment at 19:00 every day. And yet, no matter how long I wait, he never comes home. When I was scratching my head, not understanding what was going on, my son said to me, "I'm sure there are listening devices nearby." I was sure that a wiretap can only hear you if you're close by, right? I think it was like 100 meters away. So you're saying he's been bugging us since he got back near the condo? Yes, that's a possibility. My son, who answers seriously, is much calmer than I am. I decided to ambush my husband and keep an eye on him to find out his true intentions. Soon after, a little before 0 p.m., when my husband usually returns to the apartment, I was waiting for him near the building. Then I saw an extraordinary sight. The next day and the next, my husband behaved the same way, and it was beyond my imagination. Way too much. I went home in shock, and my son looked at me with concern. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "Yeah, just a little startled. I'm going to your dad's now. Kurt, wait for me at home." "Where is it?" I could not answer my son's question. I knew I should not say that because Kurt was worried about me. What was Dad watching us for? "I won't let him do that again. Just give me a minute." I smiled at my worried son. "In case he sees her, I can't let him get involved anymore. I'm going to settle this with my own hands." In fact, my husband's destination was one room in our same apartment building. I alone arrived at the door of that room, holding my trembling heart in hands, and pressed the intercom to hear a young woman's voice. "Hello, I'm heard that my husband is over, so I came here to say hi to you." "What?" "I am the wife of Chaz, Rolt, who lives just upstairs." She opened the door a little dubiously, a young, beautiful woman in her 20s, dressed in a sexy gown and wearing a strong perfume that lingered on my nose. I forcefully pulled the knob and went inside. I called out loudly into the room, overcoming her attempts to push me out and say, "What the hell are you doing? I know you're here. I need you to come out right now." Then there is a clunking sound in the back room, as if something has been dropped. Perhaps he broke something in his haste. His cheating partner said, "Mr. Chas, your wife is here to visit you. Just in time, talk to her about your divorce." I guess she gave up. The cheating partner let go of her hand on me and called to the back of the room too. Then I heard my husband's voice from the back room saying, "Hold on a second." I went ahead to go down the hallway and open the door to the room, only to find my husband with his lower half exposed. Taz stumbled around trying to quickly put on his pants, the most disgraceful sight I've ever seen. Not my jealousy towards his cheating partner, but rather seeing him in such a pathetic state. I feel my love for him and everything he has done is cooling down. Here I finally came to the point where the two words divorce came to my mind. "What are you doing with your phone?" "I'm taking pictures to prove that you cheated on me. If I don't get alimony, it won't be fair for me. Stop it already." My husband panicked and fell down, his pants getting tangled around his legs again as he tried to take the phone from me. "I don't want to be excused after this." "Just put on your pants already." "Don't be so angry. How did you know where I was, by the way?" "I put a GPS in your bag." "I'm surprised you had an affair in the same apartment." "That's not fair." My husband suddenly became angry and his face started turning red. "Don't you trust me? We're family, aren't we?" "What? What are you talking about? The man who tried to bug us?" "Huh?" My husband scratched his head, looking rather uncomfortable, and seemed to be searching for a reason to excuse himself. "That's, the wiretap you gave to Kurt in the first place can only hear audio within 100 meters, right? Thanks for giving me a big clue to uncover the affair." "Oh shit. So? What's the reason you bugged the house?" My husband mumbled and mumbled, refusing to answer anything. "You basically wanted to make sure that you had not been caught cheating on me." I had thought that my husband, who had a strangely small-minded nature, would do such a clever thing for such a daring thing. Then he murmured in a small voice, "Because it bothers me," and glancing at me, he suddenly had his eyes wide open and got surprised. "What? What is Kurt here? I turned around and there was my son. Apparently, he had followed me here without being noticed. His cheating partner was also watching us from behind my son's back, looking at us in dismay. You're disgusting. Do you realize what you're doing is hurting my precious mom? Don't get me wrong. This woman is not a friend of my dad's. She's nothing. What? What are you talking about? You said earlier that you were going to leave your wife and be with me. That was... Come to think of it, when I walked into this woman's room, she was asking my husband in the back room to talk to me about divorce. The husband was interrogated by her, who looked like a demon, and now his face is pale. I decided to settle this drama. Hey, if you want a divorce, I'll leave you now. In exchange, I will get custody of Kurt. Wait a minute, I'm not divorcing you. Because you're going to be with her, aren't you? I wasn't serious about her. It was just an excuse to hold on to this woman. Anyone would lie about something like that. What? What? You fooled me. I can't believe it. The woman grabbed my husband and became furious, shaking her hair. Cursing her to shut up, he suddenly took my hand and pulled it as hard as he could and started to walk away. Let's go home and talk. My family is more important than this woman. I was just playing with fire, so please forgive me this one time. Get your filthy hands off of her. I'll never forgive you for what you did. My husband was so startled by my son's loud yelling that he jerked and let go of my hand. That fire has consumed our bond. It's over. Oh no. His cheating partner then clung to my husband's legs and said, I won't let you go. Bitch, get your hands off my legs. I can't stay with a woman who can't even cook like you. You said you didn't mind. No, I don't want to do the housework, so I chose a wife who can do it right. They are pulling each other's hair, biting each other, and it's so disgusting. I wish you all the best. In addition to alimony, you're going to have to sell the condo and give me a share of the property. Oh yeah, and don't forget child support. Wait. My husband is flailing his legs trying to shake his cheating partner off his clutches, but she won't let go. Meanwhile, I snatched the keys to our house from my husband's bag and my son and I left the room of her. When we got back to the house, all the tension had dissipated and tears were spilling out of my eyes. Don't worry, Mommy. I'll protect you from now on. I'm sorry, I cried. I was just a little surprised. Thank you, Kurt, for being there for me. Thanks to my son, I uncovered my husband's affair and I was saved. From now on, I must protect him. My son and I quickly packed up our belongings and returned to my parents' house. After the divorce was finalized without letting him have a say, I asked him for 2 million yen in alimony, property division, and child support of 50,000 yen per month. Of course, I also asked his cheating partner to pay the same amount of alimony. I heard that they later had a falling out, and that he was also being sued for alimony by her. I thought my son would be shocked to see my husband in such a shabby state, and also to hear of our divorce. I'm glad you didn't stay fooled by Dad. It turned out all right. He encourages me with a smile. And the cooking blog I had been writing for a while became popular. When I started cooking classes, this worked out like unreal, and next month I plan to move out of my parents' house and live with my son. Life with my son is the most precious treasure for me now. I will continue to support Kurt so that he can move forward the path he wants to take without hesitation. The woman in the trunk is still alive. My 4-year-old daughter happily greeted my husband when he returned home from a business trip for the first time in a week. The next moment, however, she uttered those strange words and hid behind my back. Then, with the car keys in his hand, he turned blue and started shaking. Hey, don't talk nonsense. Knowing the power that my daughter has, I can't just dismiss it. I can't let this go, because what she says is always right. I'm kind of scared. What is my husband hiding? When the meaning of my daughter's words was eventually revealed to me, a hair-raising horror awaited me. I am Farrar, a 32-year-old housewife. After graduating from college, I joined my father's company, where I met my husband Rindell. We got married at work 6 years ago. I quit my job when I got pregnant, and soon after gave birth to our daughter Shave. My husband was overjoyed at the birth of our daughter and was even kinder to me than before. We watched her grow up together, supporting each other with love and gratitude. However, our happy life changed when our daughter celebrated her 4th birthday. My husband, who had been kind to me, suddenly became distant and cold. "Did you hear what I just said? What is wrong with you? You've been acting a little strange lately." "What? Unlike you, who spends all day at home, I'm tired from work." My husband suddenly yelled at me and roughly took the car keys in his hand. "Where are you going?" "I'm going for a drive to get away from distractions. I feel suffocated when I'm with you." My husband drove off without my stopping him and did not come back until morning. Even on his days off, he would leave the house for any reason, and when he came home, his clothes sometimes smelled of sweet perfume. He used to say that spending time with Shave was more important than anything else, but I wondered if he had found another woman. I was constantly bothered by these thoughts, but I never imagined that I would later witness the true nature of my husband, who was not so lukewarm about. That day, my husband came home after a business trip for the first time in a week. My daughter was overjoyed to see him again after a long time. However, as she was about to run up to my husband, she stopped and gave a strange look. "The woman in the trunk is still alive." I gasped in surprise. My daughter, in fact, had a strange power. She could see things that other people could. I noticed this when she was learning to speak. A few minutes after, my daughter said, "My grandmother is coming." My mother, who lived nearby, actually came to our house. When I asked her how she knew, she told me that she saw my mother walking toward us. The same thing happened again and again, and what surprised me even more was when I took my daughter to visit my grandmother's grave 6 months after she had passed away. I heard my daughter say, "My great-grandmother says there is a ring in the back of the wardrobe." I went into my grandmother's room at my parents' house and found that the ring had indeed fallen in that spot. My husband, who loves the occult, was overjoyed, calling this psychic power. However, since my daughter's magical powers were limited to family and familiar things, I thought she was just a little psychic. Nevertheless, I am certain that my daughter's words are true. So when I stared at my husband's face, wondering what the woman in the trunk was, I could see he was upset. He looked pale and his hands were shaking as he held the car keys. "Hey, don't talk nonsense." But the next moment, my husband suddenly scolded Shave and she started to cry. "Wait a minute. You startled me when you suddenly started yelling. I'm tired from my business trip and she's talking nonsense. But I feel sorry for Shave if you yell at her without asking why." "Damn it, that's enough. Don't go near my car because it contains important business documents." My husband then put the car keys in his suit pocket, which he usually left in the living room, and went to his room. I was just stunned by his attitude while I was nursing our daughter. What is Rendell getting so upset about? However, if you were told to stay away, you would become even more concerned. Furthermore, my daughter's statement shows how urgent the situation is. My husband's car originally belonged to his father, and I had a spare key that he did not know about, so I quickly went to the garage while my husband was taking a bath. Then, while trying to calm my racing heart, I opened the forbidden trunk. I knew it. What Shave said was true. There was a strange woman lying there. I could feel the blood in my body drain from my veins when I saw her turn her back to me and not move a muscle. Terrible. Why did Rendell do this? However, to my despair, the woman in the truck wobbled up, saying, "Ouch." I was relieved to see her alive. And helped her out of the car. "Hey, are you okay?" "Of course not. Just give me some water." I was taken aback when I saw her demanding so bluntly, but I went back to the kitchen and handed her a bottle of water and a loaf of bread that I had brought. She ate them both up and took a breath, saying, "Oh, I'm back to life." And then she started talking about my husband. She was, after all, the one with whom Rendell was having an affair. They had met online about 3 months ago, which coincided with the time when my husband's attitude suddenly turned cold. He had secretly accompanied her on this business trip, but they argued in the car on the way home, and he said, "I'll tell your wife," and chased after the woman who got out of the car and grabbed her. She was pushed and hit her head, fainted, and found herself in the trunk of the car. Apparently, he thought the woman had lost her temper and quickly hid her there. I was nauseated by his despicable behavior. We need to go to the hospital and the police right away. I'm fine for now, so I can go to a hospital tomorrow. You don't have to go to the police either, but please pay for my treatment. Yes, of course. Okay, then 50 million is fine. What? I thought I had misheard her and involuntarily looked back at her face. What are you surprised at? Your husband is the son of the president, isn't he? If I go to the police, the company is finished, and you as a wife lose your happy life. I finally realized that she was trying to scare me. And from what I could gather from her story, it seemed that Rindell was lying about a lot of things to the person with whom he was having the affair. I am the only daughter, and my husband is my father's son-in-law, so it is not a mistake to say that he is the son of the CEO. But he's not even an officer of the company yet, so his arrest doesn't affect that much. The house we are living in now is also in my father's name, so I am not losing everything. But still, 50 million is a lot of money to blow off. My husband is an asshole, but this woman is just as bad. I was so disgusted that I decided to throw them both into the abyss together. Rendell manages our finances, so I don't have any money at my disposal. So, let's both grab my husband's weakness and extract money from him. Oh, I know what you mean. Your husband is a cheapskate, isn't he? Apparently, she had approached my husband for money, but had always been frustrated with his tight purse strings. Apparently, that was the reason for the fight that day, and she readily believed me and accepted my proposal. We reached an agreement, and I told her to hide herself in my car parked next to mine and wait there. When I returned home, I called my mother, who lived nearby, and told her briefly what had happened and asked her to take care of my daughter that night. My husband got out of the bath and looked at my daughter suspiciously as she was being taken away by my mother, who had come to pick her up. Shave said the house is scary because there are ghosts in it. I'm going to have a famous psychic my father knows come to our house tomorrow, because what she says always comes true. I lied, implying that tonight was the only chance I had to get rid of the stuff in the trunk, and my husband pulled a face. He looked very pale. You should purify yourself too. What are you talking about? I have nothing to hide. What? I didn't ask you that. Dada. He yelled at me in a completely unimpressive voice and went to the bedroom to escape. That night, I stayed in bed and waited for him to make a move. Sure enough, at 1, my husband woke up from the bed next to mine. I followed him a little behind as he quietly left the bedroom. He got a shovel from the shed and got into his car in the garage, never dreaming that the trunk was empty, and started off. I quickly got into my own car and started to pursue him with a woman who was hiding. He was headed for a nearby mountain. There was no danger of getting lost because the road was a straight one, and I drove with enough distance between us so that my husband would not notice us. I was worried that if we went too far up to the top of the mountain, my phone might not be in range, but fortunately, we found my husband's car around the middle of the mountain. I parked the car in the bushes nearby and decided to keep an eye on his activities along with the cheating partner. It was a bright moonlit night, plus he had left his car lights on, so we had plenty to observe. He started digging in the dirt with a shovel, and after an hour or so finally completed the hole. Then, with trepidation, he opened the trunk of the car, where he finally realized that the woman was not there, and seemed to be shocked to see. It seems to be easy to see that he's upset and checking in the car and under bonnet, even though she's not supposed to be in such a place. She said, Hey, look at that, it's super tacky. She got into a bad mood and took out her phone to call him. He is horrified by the sudden ringtone and her name on the screen, which is clearly visible even from a distance. Then, to top it all off, he answered the phone with trepidation and heard a low voice saying, "Rufel." He threw out the phone and tried to run away, falling into the hole he dug for himself. Then she got carried away and deliberately shook her hair into a shaggy mess, painted her face red with lipstick, got out of the car, and went to the front of the hole. At that moment, the whole area was filled with my husband's screams that shook the mountain trees. Rendell, it's terrible. Why did you take my life? No, I didn't do it on purpose, believe me. I loved you, Rendell. I loved you too. I would never have mistaken for my beloved. It was an unfortunate accident. My husband tries to climb over to the other side of the hole, but he can't get up off his back. He still tried to escape by moving his hands, but he was sliding down like prey stuck in an anthill. Then she picked up a shovel that had fallen and began throwing a pile of dirt into the hole. Oh, hey, what are you doing? Stop it. I don't want to be alone. Let's sleep here together. Hey, I'll never forget you, Lyman. So please, please, go to heaven. My husband finally cried out and sobbed. I had never seen him like that before. I was so disgusted, I thought. Why don't you just leave it at that? I walked over to her side and stood in front of the hole. Farrar, why? How long have you been there? I was right behind Lyman all the way back there earlier. I followed her out of the car and was right nearby, filming this farce with my phone. But my husband didn't even have time to notice. To be precise, she and I followed you all the way from home together. It was there that he finally realized that she was alive and had been tricked. He said, "Hey, how dare you do this to me? I didn't realize you were such an idiot. I think I'll put this on the internet." He became furious and grabbed her by the legs and dragged her into the hole, where she began to take pictures of him with her phone, and they began to grapple violently. "You son of a bitch. I'm gonna get you for real. I'm not stupid enough to get beat up by you." But the awkward argument didn't last long, and then the police car arrived. I secretly messaged my mother in the waiting car to let her know where I was and asked her to call the police. "Why did you call the police? You lied to me." "Of course I would never do anything with you." I told her that the president of my husband's company was my father, and that he was my son-in-law and had no power. Not because of that. I don't care what happens to my husband. In exchange for $50 million, I will give him to you. What? There's no way I'm going to keep this oversized trash. I'll return it to you after I'm done with it. Oh, that's too bad. I thought you two looked pretty good together. Later, a police officer gets out of his patrol car and shines his flashlight on her, and my husband begins to make excuses. "Police officer, it was all a mistake. I thought I took her life, but she was actually alive. There's nothing wrong with that." "Well, yes, nothing happened, so let's just leave it at that." "What? What are you talking about? We have a problem with you digging a hole in this mountain on someone else's private property without permission." "What? Oh, let's go to the station and ask them what you just said." The policeman pulled my husband up out of the hole with a hoot and said, "You should come with us," and shifted his gaze toward Lyman, who looked twice at her face the next moment. Her face looked like a lame bald head because of the bright red lipstick she had made up as a joke. But the policeman didn't say a word about it and said unexpectedly, "You're Raina Hallman, the wanted criminal." I thought she looked suspicious, but I was right. I was really disgusted with my husband's stupidity when I knew that she is a habitual criminal of marriage fraud. "Fair. I'll be right back, so please don't tell your father about this." "What? Don't you have anything else to be sorry for?" "I'm sorry I betrayed you, but I was deceived. Lyman, not Raina, was a con artist." I sighed loudly in dismay at my husband's brazenness as he began to play the victim, even as he apologized to me. "You know what? I'm talking about you putting her in the trunk. Sure, she's a criminal, but what you did is even worse," he said, "because I had no choice. If I hadn't done that, it would have been a disaster for the company and for—" "You say that a lot. You just wanted to protect your position. Anyway, your human nature is absolutely impossible to deal with. I'm sorry. From now on, I will change my mind and think of you and shave first. So don't give up on me." He shook off the officer's arm there and got down on his knees. "My mother has already spoken to my father. He's going to fire you, so you don't have to come back here forever." I told him that, and had the police take my husband away in tears and his flustered lover away. He was arrested, and the cheating partner filed a damage report against her, and he went to jail. I divorced my husband and demanded $20,000 in alimony for the affair, $10 million in child support, and $20,000 in alimony from the cheating partner. My husband was also charged $30,000 by the cheating partner for the injury incident, and owed a large amount of money. I, on the other hand, had to go back to my father's office again, asking my mother to support me with childcare. Shabe said to me, "You know, Grandpa wants Mom to help him with his work." Her words gave me the push I needed. I had always assumed that my father did not expect me to help him, but apparently he wanted me to take over his company. Through the mysterious power of my daughter, I now know my father's true intentions, and I intend to push forward with my work and grow myself in order to raise my daughter to be a great person. Ever since I was a little girl, my grandmother was a talkative and caring person. Many people always gathered around her, and she was a person with a mysterious charm. My husband, who touched her angry heartstrings, was instilled with such fear that he could not approach us anymore because of her mysterious power. My name is Ruthie. I have been married to my husband Jackson for 2 years now, and we have been blessed with a child we have always wanted. I wanted to have a child right after marriage, but due to a difference of opinion with my husband, we finally decided to have a child after 2 years. From the beginning of our marriage, my husband was not very interested in children and was not actively seeking to have children. It was not that my husband disliked children, but he wanted to spend more time together first. My husband and I were both still young, and I agreed with him because I felt there was no need of rush. We thought we would wait for the right time when we both wanted to have children. However, about 6 months ago, my husband suddenly became very active in our fertility activities, and within a few months, I became pregnant. I was very happy about that, but I couldn't help but wonder what made him change all of a sudden. I asked my husband why, and it seemed that it was because he had heard that a woman he knew had become ill and was unable to give birth, which made him anxious. My husband and I are still young in age and have no significant health problems. However, my husband felt that this would not last forever. It was understandable that he wanted to have children while he was still healthy, so that if something happened to him, he would not regret it. In fact, my husband told me that he knew a woman who had not given birth before her illness and regretted it terribly. Considering the woman's regret, it is fair enough to make him feel that way. Normally, we tend to think of such stories as irrelevant to us, or they have nothing to do with us, even though we see those stories on the internet. However, when I hear that such a thing has happened to someone close to my husband, I suddenly felt a sense of reality. That is why I agreed with my husband's opinion. As a result, I am very happy that I was able to be pregnant. It is true that I became pregnant somewhat hastily because of this, but I've always wanted a child, and I am very much looking forward to the time of birth. The same was true for my husband, my in-laws, and my mother and grandmother who lived at home with me and were eagerly awaiting the day our new family would grow. Then, a few months passed after I became pregnant, and less than a month before my due date. My grandmother and mother asked me if I would like to have a home birth. My grandmother and mother suggested that we go back home to have the baby. My grandmother in particular seemed to really want me to have the baby back home, and was very enthusiastic about the idea. I just want to see my first great-grandchild as soon as possible. Think of it as a present for you, old lady, who has a short life ahead of her, huh? My grandmother, who is over 90 years old and bedridden, does this whenever anything happens. I don't know how many times I have heard her say, "I have a short life ahead." I can't tell you how many times I've heard she says this, and yet she always seems to be in such good health. Besides, the time I could actually spend with my grandmother is limited. So with this in mind, I decided to comply with my grandmother's wishes. My grandmother's strong wish was to have my baby back home, but it took a lot of convincing for my husband to go through with it. My grandmother had the personality that she is quite upfront and good at talking to people. She was bedridden and showed such vitality that it was hard to believe that she was over 90 years old. Even now, she often engages in chats with neighbors who come to check on her. The relentless words and actions that come out of this personality are the same towards my husband, let alone to me, her granddaughter. Combined with the fact that she says things that make me feel certain, my husband seems to have a bit of a hard time with my grandmother. My husband was not at all comfortable with the idea of going home to my grandmother's house to give birth. Perhaps that is why my husband was reluctant when I told him that I wanted to have a home birth and did not nod at all. But it was also my grandmother who changed his mind. She was on the phone with my husband, using her own short life expectancy as a shield, as usual, asking him what she ought to do if she did not get to see her first great-granddaughter's face. As a result, she managed to get my husband's permission to have our baby back home, although he seemed reluctant to do so. I couldn't help but laugh at the situation, but my husband is very busy with his work and is often away from home. Even besides this thing with her, it was true that I felt safer having the baby back home. When I returned to my parents' home for the first time in a long time, I thought that my grandmother was still in good health. Since my father and grandfather passed away, my grandmother and mother have been living together, but their relationship is great. My grandmother talks a lot and my mother smiles as she listens to her. My grandmother is from the father's side, so they are not related by blood, but their relationship is so trusting that one does not feel that way. I was happy to see their relationship, which almost made me jealous, but what surprised me even more was the number of visitors to my grandmother. Many people would come to see her even when I still lived with her, but even though she is now lying down in her bed all the time, people keep coming, some to check on her, others to ask for advice, and so on. People of all ages show up at my parents' house day after day. The age range is wide, from people not much older than me to people about the same age as my grandmother. My husband and I first met at my grandmother's house, and since I have seen this kind of scene since I was a child, I thought I was used to it, but after a long time, I was impressed again. My grandmother speaks her mind and her tone of voice is not always beautiful. However, she always chose her words with the other person in mind and never turned her eyes away from them. This attitude is what makes her the person she is today, and is probably the reason why people still love her even after her illness. I was comfortable living with my grandmother, who had such a mysterious charm, and my kind mother, and I lived a peaceful life after I returned to my hometown. A few weeks had passed since I returned to my hometown, and my due date was approaching. Suddenly my grandmother said this to me: "Ruthie, don't go back to your home after giving birth. There's nothing good for you back home, so stay here." My grandmother said this with a more serious face than ever before. I laughed, wondering what kind of joke it was, but she stared at me without changing her serious expression. I was so confused that I could only make a vague face at that moment. My grandmother went straight to sleep, so I immediately went to my mother for advice, and she smiled and convinced me to listen to my grandmother's words. "Actually, your grandma, she has a mysterious power. She must have a bad feeling about this. You better listen to your grandmother." My mother smiles with a look of conviction, but I can't believe such an unrealistic story. I am sure that my grandmother said this because she thought she would miss me returning home after the birth of my child. My mother may have been thinking of my grandmother's feelings and told me to stay at home. I decided to think so and told my husband about it that night. Then my husband was surprised. "What? It's unusual for your mother to joke like that, let alone your grandmother." "I know, right?" I was so surprised. We had a light-hearted laugh and I quickly forgot about it. A few days later, I was due to give birth, and the baby was born without incident. Unfortunately, my husband was too busy with work and could not be present, but he agreed to come and pick me up once I and the child were settled, and it was decided that I would stay with my parents for a while longer. After a short stay in the hospital, I was discharged and spent my days waiting for my husband with our newborn daughter. A little later, my husband came to pick up my daughter and I as promised, but without my knowledge, he was turned away at the door by my mother. I didn't even know that happened till my husband contacted me. He said, "So your mother told me to go home. Do you know why?" I learned about the situation for the first time when my husband sent me that message. I don't know why, and my husband seemed confused, so I immediately went to my mother and grandmother to find out why. "I told you it would be better for you not to return after the birth. That's why I asked Mr. Jackson to leave." My grandmother then replied with a look that said it was obvious and the reason why she returned him. I thought she was joking or something when she said that, but it never occurred to me that my grandmother was serious. But even if she was serious, I couldn't admit to such a thing, and I immediately protested. However, neither my grandmother nor my mother will take me seriously. On the contrary, they both try to talk me out of it. I can feel it. I know you will regret it if you go back, so you must do as I say. My mother said that she had found that out through my grandmother's mysterious power, but there was no way I would believe such a ridiculous story. I was worried that my grandmother had finally got dementia or something, but even my mother nodded with a serious face, so I didn't know what the hell was going on. But when I said I was unconvinced, my grandmother muttered, "It can't be helped. Mr. Jackson is coming back his next day off. I'll talk to him then, and if you still want to go home, you can do whatever you want." Instead, I was told that she was the only one allowed to talk to him when he came to pick me up, and that I was not allowed to intervene. I was also told that I am not allowed to contact him until he comes to pick me up. To be honest, I thought if this was some kind of a skit, but my mother and grandmother both had serious expressions on their faces, and they didn't look like they were joking. Besides, even if I raised my voice any further, they would not listen to me. So I reluctantly decided to take my grandmother's suggestion. A few days later, it was the weekend, and my husband came to my parents' house as promised. I greeted him lightly and invited him into the house. He seemed somewhat nervous because he had been turned away the other day, but other than that, there was nothing unusual about him, and he went straight to my grandmother and mother. My mother is holding my newborn daughter, and my husband quickly reaches for the child, but it is the grandmother who stopped it. "Before greeting your beautiful child, I want to make sure of something." My husband turned to her saying so, looking at her suspiciously. She told him to make himself comfortable, and then began to talk to him as if they were making small talk. "How is Mrs. Ursula doing?" The grandmother's casual remark changed the color of my husband's face. It is probably a woman's name. I had no idea who she was talking about. I was puzzled. As if leaving me and my husband out of it, my grandmother went on with her story. "Yesterday, the two of you went shopping at a department store in front of the station, didn't you? Did you get the baby items you wanted?" My husband's eyes widened in astonishment at my grandmother's words. His complexion was worse than before, and he was sweating so much that I could see it. But on the contrary, I am left baffled as to the meaning of my grandmother's statement. To begin with, I don't even know who the woman in question is, and I don't understand what it means for my husband to go shopping for baby items with her. My husband opened his mouth, squeezing out a word with a bitter look, as if he can't afford to pay attention to me. "How do you know that?" In contrast to him, my grandmother replies in a cheerful voice. "Ruthie told you, didn't she, about my mysterious power? I know all of your moves." The husband looked at my grandmother, smiling as if he did not understand her. My husband muttered, "You're talking nonsense," and denied her words without effort, but her next words left him completely speechless. "Ursula can't get pregnant because she's sick and had a total hysterectomy, right? So what on earth were you buying all that baby stuff for? Maybe you were getting another child somewhere else." My husband, who had been showered by her words, turned his head down and said nothing. Although ambiguously, I was starting to understand what was going on. The name Ursula still didn't ring a bell, but I had heard that my husband knew someone who had been unable to conceive because of an illness. That person is definitely Miss Ursula. But my grandmother is right. Why would she need to buy baby items? And with my husband? I had a bad feeling, though I didn't completely understand, and an unpleasant perspiration began to run down my spine. "I could tell you, but why don't you at least say it yourself at the end? Otherwise you will regret it." This in response to my grandmother's statement. My husband slowly raised his head and looked at me. Then, in a quiet voice, he told me the truth of the matter. "I was going to divorce you after bringing our child home today." Hearing this quietly spoken plan, I involuntarily felt fear for my husband. My husband thought about remarrying Ursula, with whom he had been having an affair, but Ursula was unable to have children due to an illness. My husband took pity on her and decided to have a child with me instead. Even if it was only half the blood, the baby was his child. It would be better than adopting a stranger. So with this in mind, he consulted with Ursula and actively worked with me to conceive a child. And today, he came to pick up the child that was born as a result. In other words, he didn't care about me. As long as he could bring his child home, that was all that mattered. I felt fear in my husband's every word as he spoke so blandly. I felt as if my husband in front of me was an incomprehensible and unpleasant being. At the same time, I felt an inexpressible anger welling up inside me. And as if to speak for me, my grandmother told my husband that she would never give him a child. I will not let you take my great-grandchildren under any circumstances. So give up and divorce Ruthie. He shakes his shoulders in fear as she looks at him. In her anger at my husband, I had forgotten that my grandmother's mysterious power was real, and it was only natural that the husband should be afraid of this mysterious grandmother. Understood? From now on, you mess with my grandchildren and great-grandchildren a little bit, and then I won't be as calm as I am now. Saying this, she leaned forward slightly from the bed where she was lying down. I'm going to use my mysterious power to curse you. The husband, who had been sobbing and crawling away from my grandmother who laughed like a witch, left my parents' house. Afterwards, I thanked my grandmother and mother for what had happened and told them that I was amazed at their mysterious power. My grandmother and mother laughed hysterically when they saw me. There is no such thing as a mysterious power, they both said, laughing. In fact, what my grandmother did was simply to talk about what she had learned from other people. My husband's parents found out about my husband's plan and talked to my grandmother about it shortly before I had my baby back home. When she heard this story, she called me up and continued to investigate my husband using her extensive friendships. She also told me that she had been trying to get me to talk to my husband about the mysterious power she had by telling me about it. Whether my husband believed her or not, he would recognize her as a mysterious being, and he would not bother me or our children in the future. She thought so and went ahead with this plan without telling me. As a result, my grandmother's plan was a great success, and my husband was able to reach an agreement without any complaints about alimony or child support, and he insisted on giving me custody of the children. I was so convinced that it was also thanks to the mysterious power that my grandmother and mother had come up with that I began to wonder if it really existed.
You are useless now. Stay here and sleep here quietly. With these words, my husband left me and our 4-year-old daughter in the snowy mountains. I didn't even know where I was in the dense mountains. The wind was blowing ice cold, and I was so cold to the core that I couldn't stop shivering. Just follow grandmother. She suddenly shouted, and I looked where she was pointing, but there was no one there. But I decided to go ahead as my daughter said, because she has a mysterious power. I am Paige, a 32-year-old homeworker. I met my husband Keegan, who is the same age as me, at a blind date I attended with a friend. Keegan is an accomplished and well-spoken man who started his own business when he was in college. I liked him and decided to marry him. Keegan's family is a prominent local businessman, so my friends envied Mr. Fall marrying into a rich family. My husband and I moved in together right after we got married at the request of my in-laws. My parents-in-law were kind people, but my mother-in-law was sickly and in need of nursing care. I understand you are a nurse, Ms. Page. My wife is frail in that condition, and I was so worried about her. I am so grateful that you came to marry into this family. I would be happy if I could be of any help. I quit my nursing job to take care of my mother-in-law and became a work-from-work worker, which I had wanted to do for a long time. I have always loved web design, creating internet-related websites. This allowed me to do it in my spare time with no strict quotas. However, one thing that bothered me was that after 3 years of marriage, we still could not have children. My husband's company was doing well and the economy was booming enough to open a branch office. However, my husband seemed to be on a roll, playing around, and rarely came home. "Hey, honey, your mother isn't feeling too well. You should be there for her a little bit. Even if she won't say it, I'm sure she misses you. Huh, she has you so she'll be fine. I'm busy." My husband would not listen to my pleas for my mother-in-law's sake. I wanted to show my mother-in-law, who was weak and almost bedridden, my grandchild, but I felt bad because under the circumstances I could not accommodate her, who had been told she did not have long to live. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to show you my grandchild." "What are you talking about, Mr. Page? You're doing nothing wrong. I am happy to have a daughter like you." My mother-in-law, who was very kind to me, was like a real mother to me, having lost both of my parents early in life. She would take walks outside in her wheelchair on days when the weather was nice, and she would cook nutritious food softly so that it would be easy to eat. In my own way, I did my best to make my mother-in-law's life as comfortable as possible. One day, my mother-in-law called me to her bedside. She said, "I'm so happy for you. Mr. Page will soon have a beautiful daughter. She said she will be born around the time of cherry blossoms, so please name her Ruby." What? I'd be happy if that would happen. My mother-in-law suddenly said something strange, which puzzled me, but I thought she might be dreaming because of her illness. Not long after that, my mother-in-law passed away, and I was sad. She had been there for me every day for the first 3 years of our marriage. Then, shortly after my mother-in-law's funeral, I found out I was pregnant. And the due date was in March, during the cherry blossom season. I was surprised that it happened just as my mother-in-law had said, but I was more than happy. I was sure that my husband would be pleased as well, so I confided in him as I waited for him to get, "Honey, you should be happy. I'm pregnant." "Oh, really? I'm not good with kids. I don't think I want one right now." "Are you serious?" "If you really want to have the baby, I won't take care of it, so you'll have to raise it on your own. Since you're going to give birth on your own, you'll have to pay for it yourself." I was so coldly spoken to that I was stunned. He smelled like alcohol every day when he came home because his company's business was booming. I had a pretty good idea of where he, who smelled of alcohol when he came home every day because the company was doing well, and whose clothes smelled of sweet perfume, was hanging out. My husband probably saw me as nothing more than a convenient housekeeper who took care of his parents. However, I did not want to give up the precious life I carried in my belly. I used my savings from my bachelor days and my income as a home worker to buy the things I needed. As my mother-in-law had predicted, my daughter was born during the cherry blossom season, and I named her Ruby. She was a beautiful, fair-skinned child who somewhat resembled my mother-in-law. My daughter grew up in a very healthy way, but she was a little bit different. From the time she was a baby, she would cackle and wave her hands when she saw no one around. At the time, I thought she was just a cheerful child, but when she became able to speak, around the age of 2, she started talking to the altar. She would say, "Grandma, do you love Ruby?" Ruby loves Grandma. When I asked my daughter, "Who are you talking to?" I asked her, but she just smiled. When she was 3 years old, she seemed to be constantly talking with someone in the corner of the Japanese-style room. I asked, "Hey, Ruby, who were you talking to and what were you talking about?" "Yeah, you know what? Grandma said she's going to give me the hand-me-downs in the drawer for me." "Grandma?" She said she made it out of one of her favorite kimonos. Feeling strange, I opened my mother-in-law's drawer. Then he found a hand-sewn cue ball there. Seeing Sakura happily playing with it, my father-in-law murmured nostalgically, "I miss it. That fabric is a kimono my wife used to wear when she was young. You've been playing hooky. She was good at sewing. Amazingly, my daughter seems to be able to talk to her mother-in-law who is really gone." However, we did not want to tell anyone because we felt that something bad would happen to my daughter if she disclosed it. Our days were happy, but not all good things come after that. My husband's company was on the verge of collapse due to his spending and profligate management. We no longer had any money to live on, so we had to live on what my father-in-law gave us and my work money. My husband eventually cried to his faith and got a loan. Thanks to that, the company managed to rebuild itself. Would my husband be able to change his life after living a life of playing around every day? I was skeptical. Then one day, my daughter said something that bothered me. She said, "Daddy is going to do something bad." "What? What do you mean?" "I don't know. But, Grandma is worried." She told me to be careful. I didn't quite understand what she meant, but my daughter's words bothered me terribly. Bad things my husband might do. Is it company-related, or is it women's issues? I have given it a lot of thought, but I don't have any proof, and I can't ask him. But just in case, I made sure to carry my voice recorder with me. I also told my daughter not to tell her dad that she could see her grandmother. I had a bad feeling about this. Later, when I was inevitably bothered by my daughter's words, I searched my husband's personal belongings and found a large number of receipts from cabaret clubs and bars. It seems that he had not changed his habit of playing around as he had been doing while his company was struggling and his was helping him out. There was also a curious note that said, "I'm going to get advice from the group about the plan." Pie group, you mean? I don't think so. If what my daughter says is true, my mother-in-law is warning us. Surely it could be that Ruby and I are in danger. Such a premonition sent a shiver down my spine. I was on guard for the next few weeks, but in the end, nothing more happened. Eventually, my alarming feelings were relegated to a corner of my mind, and I began to go about my day as usual. Then one day, my husband spoke to me in a rare good mood. He said, "Thanks to Dad's loan, the company is looking up and profits are on the rise. So, why don't we go on a family vacation for the first time in a while? It's been a long time, or maybe it's our first time." "Oh, I don't know. Ruby's just a baby before. I've booked a hot spring in the mountains near the amusement park. Ruby will love it." "Oh, really?" My heart was shaken. Although I still have some doubts about my husband, I still can't give up my desire to believe him when he turns to me with the same kind expression as in the past. If my husband had really changed his mind, this might be an opportunity to restore our marriage. With this thought in mind, I agreed to the family trip. And as I was preparing for the trip, I gradually forgot about my daughter's words and was excited about travelling for the first time in a long time. On the day of our trip, I was surprised to see the rental car my husband had rented. I was a little scared that we would be going into the mountains with so much snow, but I was afraid that if I refused now, it would upset my husband even though we were going on a trip. I quietly got in the back seat of the car. My husband was driving with our daughter. But in hindsight, I should have been more careful at that time. More than an hour after we left, my husband said we were heading to a hot spring in the mountains, and I felt like we were getting further and further into the mountains. In addition, there was quite a bit of snow on the ground. Eventually, the car turned off the national highway onto a side road, and I thought something was wrong. "Hey, honey, isn't this road funny? Who built an inn on this mountain road off the national highway? Are you sure you're on the right road?" But my husband didn't reply. He drove straight ahead with a fearful expression on his face and a furrowed brow. I began to feel anxious. I was holding my daughter tightly and biting my lip. Then the car came to an abrupt stop as we continued down the roadless road. He said, "You have no more use for us. Stay here and sleep quietly." He pulled me and our 4-year-old daughter out of the car. "I'm taking your cell phone." "Honey, wait." No matter how much I shouted, my husband ignored me. Then, just as he was about to start the car, he turned around, grinned and drove away. Oh no. We were left behind. Snow was falling all around us, and we didn't even know where we were in the dense mountains. My husband took my cell phone, but I actually had a spare phone in my backpack. But unfortunately, I can't get a signal and can't call for help anywhere. Still, I had a bad feeling from the moment the car turned off the highway and both my daughter and I were wearing our down jackets tightly and carrying our backpack. In addition, I had put various things in my backpack as a precaution since we were traveling in winter. In fact, although I thought I would be fine, I was really concerned about my daughter's words and had prepared various things just in case, but I never thought this would happen. The wind was blowing icy cold, chilling me to the core and making me shiver. I took out a disposable heat pack from my backpack and put a caramel in her mouth to warm her body and calm her down. In the meantime, the snow was getting worse and we were afraid to get lost. What should we do? As we were at a loss, my daughter suddenly cried out, "Mummy," Auntie said, "come here." I looked where my daughter was pointing, but there was no one there. "No, I can't see them, but my daughter can," she said. "Just follow your grandmother's lead." I decided to follow my daughter's lead, because she has a mysterious power. So, I think I wanted to believe that we'll figure it out. I walked with my daughter's hand in the snow, trying my best not to slip. She said, "Mum, I see a light. Grandma says to keep walking toward it." I could indeed see the light in the direction she was pointing. I almost burst into tears when I thought, "Thank God. Thank you, mother-in-law." I murmured softly to my mother-in-law. Finally, we reached the hotel at the foot of the mountain and decided to rest there to warm up. I had some extra cash in my backpack, so I knew I could stay a while, during which I would come up with a plan to revenge my husband. Don't think you can get away with this. I'm going to thoroughly investigate why you were after our lives, so be prepared. 5 days later, I contacted my father-in-law. He was quite surprised to hear from me, but when he found out that Ruby and I were safe, he was very happy and came to pick us up to our hotel. My father-in-law told me that my husband had told people that my daughter and I had fallen into a ravine on a snowy mountain and were lost. I was too stunned to say anything. He also said that they had searched but could not find us and that they would not be able to find our bodies until the spring. My father-in-law said that he stopped his son several times, saying let's wait a little longer, but he forcibly proceeded with the preparations. Furthermore, my father-in-law handed me something. This led me to a shocking revelation. When I went to my husband, he was preparing for our funeral as I had heard. A large, smiling photo of my daughter and I had been enlarged and was displayed as a portrait. Then, my daughter and I suddenly showed up. Oh my God! Why? Our relatives who had been helping with the preparations sat up and got set. My husband looked at me and my daughter with his eyes wide open, and then he let out a stupid voice. "What? You're alive?" "Oh my dear, I'm alive and well." "How?" "You thought we were dead as you intended, didn't you? You left me and Ruby in the snow that deep in the mountains." "You, what the hell are you talking about?" The people around us began to murmur. That's probably true. If he told everyone that we fell into a ravine in the snowy mountains when he intentionally left us there, that is a true crime. Good heavens, don't tell me a lie. Oh my, can you say the same thing after listening to this? I played the audio on my hidden voice recorder. It played him saying, "You are no longer of any use to us. Just be quiet and sleep here." And people there started to get upset. "I didn't say that. She set me up. It's a hoax." My husband tried to cover it up in a hearse-evany, but his face was pale and his lips were trembling. I played a video on my cell phone as the last resort. In the video, my husband says, "I left them on the snowy mountain as planned. The life insurance money from my wife and daughter will restore the company, and we will have enough money for luxuries. Please be waited. I will pay you back in full with some extra gift." My husband was clearly seen on the phone with someone in the car. He panicked and tried to stop the camera, but it was already playing and everyone was sneaking around, looking at him coldly. Why is this stuff here? Who in the world did this? I asked your father-in-law to copy the footage from the drive recorder at the car rental store where you rented the car. Dad, you abandoned your own son. How can you take the side of such a stranger? With these words, my husband started to confront my father-in-law. But my father-in-law was quite angry and was glaring at my husband in a frightening manner. Of course he would abandon you. Because, behind my back, you had not just me and Ruby, but also your father insured for a very large sum. I wonder if you loaned money from some very dangerous group of people. But that doesn't mean they're going to try to kill us. I'm surprised. The father-in-law stood in front of my husband and shouted angrily at him, holding up a life insurance policy that he had found in his drawer. You were going to kill me and get all my money for yourself, weren't you? How can I call a guy like you my son? Then, with his father accusing him, and with all the evidence in hand, he had no way out, so he reopened his mouth and said something outrageous. You know what? After all, everyone is still alive, so it's all good. I did what I had to do because I was dropped by the debt collectors. I had no choice, so please forgive me. Stop joking. How can I forgive you? I'll call the police too. No way. We're family. You can let bygones be bygones. Please. And my husband began to get down on his knees in front of us. My father-in-law and I looked at each other in disgust. He said, I am sorry. I am begging, as you can see. Please forgive me. Please don't involve the police. I will change my mind and start over. My husband rubbing his forehead on the floor and apologizing with tears, snot and slobber is a truly appalling sight. I can't do this. I'm so sick to my stomach of you. Go to hell. I guess he was hoping that apologizing would help, but that's when he got stunned. Apparently, one of our relatives who had heard our conversation had called the police, and the police arrived and took him away. In the end, my husband was charged with attempting to kill his wife, child, and father because of all the evidence. He will not be able to come out of the jail for a long time. The company has gone bankrupt, and even if he gets out, I know that he will be miserable because no one, not even his father or other relatives, will deal with him. And the bad associates who had talked him into committing the crime have also been caught. Of course, we divorced and custody of Ruby is now mine. Furthermore, at my father-in-law's request, my daughter and I got adopted by him and received his inheritance as a gift. I now live with my kind father-in-law and watch Ruby grow up. He says, find a good man and remarry. I will marry you off as my daughter, but I have no intention of doing so at the moment. I am happy now. The other day, my daughter said to me, Grandma says she is happy for you, but she won't be able to see you anymore. She says goodbye. I feel a little sad, but if my mother-in-law doesn't have to worry about me anymore, maybe it's for the... I'll make sure to keep Ruby safe, mother-in-law. I put my palms together in front of my mother-in-law's grave again today.
Run away, Mommy. Don't ever come home. I was rushing home from work later than usual, when suddenly I received such a call from my daughter. However, the call was disconnected and I could not get through to her. I knew something was wrong when I heard my daughter's urgent voice, and I immediately jumped into a cab. 15 minutes later, I stood stunned in front of my house, engulfed in flames. How could this happen? Along with these questions, I had no idea if my daughter was safe or not. I rushed to call my husband, but what I got back from him was a shock. Why are you still alive? I had no way of knowing at the time that this was the beginning of a nightmare. I'm Carson, 37 years old. I live with my husband Nevada and our 9-year-old daughter Sage. I used to live with my parents-in-law until 3 years ago when they both passed away. My husband inherited the house they lived in and lived there. My sister-in-law and her husband also lived near the house, and they had no children. They loved our daughter as if she were their own child. My brother-in-law is an ordinary businessman, but he manages stocks, and when he has extra income, he buys gifts for my daughter and invites us to expensive restaurants. While I was a little envious of such a life, when my sister-in-law recommended stocks to me, I refused because I didn't have the courage. Then one day, my husband might stay at work that day, so I was supposed to spend the day alone with my daughter. However, I had a lot of work to do, and I got home later than usual. Sage should have been home from school by now. I looked at my phone and I was about to call her when my daughter called. "Sorry, I'm going to be late." "Mom, run away. Don't ever come home," my daughter shouted, interrupting my words, and the phone went dead. I was so confused that I rushed to call her back, but after that, the phone was disconnected. What the hell is going on? Unable to stand still, I jumped into a cab. Anxiety surged through me as I made my way to my home. When I arrived, to my surprise, my house was on fire. "Ishir, where are you?" I shouted and tried to jump into the fire, but the firemen stopped me. They told me that the fire was too strong, and they still did not know if there were people inside. I was so anxious that I couldn't stop crying. I called my husband to let him know the situation as I sobbed with shaking hands. "Nevada, our house is on fire, and here," he said something I couldn't believe. "Why are you still alive?" "What?" My reaction made him panic, and he began to try his best to excuse himself. "Oh no, it's not that." But from there on, his words fell on deaf ears. The more my husband denied it, the more suspicious I became. I hung up the phone unilaterally, not wanting to talk any longer. Then I received a message from Sage saying, "Don't worry, I'm at a friend's house." When I saw this, I was so relieved that my body relaxed at once. However, my suspicions about my husband remained. Could it be that he set our house on fire? I thought I was living happily with my husband, daughter, and family. When I thought of this, tears began to well up in my eyes again. Then, with a word of kerosene, my sister-in-law came rushing toward us with tears. I heard there was a fire in the neighborhood, so I came to see what was going on. My sister-in-law, actually. I tried to tell my sister-in-law about the conversation I had with my husband, but I was too impatient to explain. "Are you okay? Calm down." I nodded at her words and began to speak slowly, but she seemed surprised at the content of my words. Nevertheless, my sister-in-law gently hugged me and told me that I could come to her house for a while. When I arrived at my sister-in-law's house, I still received a mountain of calls and messages from my husband. I am even afraid that he will find out where I am and come after me. My sister-in-law, seeing me like that, also told me that it would be better not to contact him. It seems my sister-in-law had been contacted by my husband, but she lied about me. She lied to him, saying that she did not know where I had gone. After this, she told me something surprising. Actually, I passed by Kerson's house this afternoon. That's when I saw Nevada. He looked kind of flustered. "What?" I thought at that moment that my husband might have planted something in the house. I did not want to suspect, but that would explain his words. "Why are you still alive? I'm on your side no matter what." How reassuring was the encouragement of my sister-in-law. And on her recommendation, I decided to block my husband's phone calls. But my head was still in turmoil. I don't know why he wanted to hurt us, but whatever the reason, I can't forgive him. I decided that I would not let him do what he wanted any longer. The next day, I took the day off from work and went to my parents' house a short distance away to drop off Sage. We decided to keep her out of school for a while because we knew that anything could happen to her. My parents did not ask me for more details. They did not ask me about the details, but they were willing to let their daughter stay at my sister-in-law's house because they thought it would be a bother for both of them. As for Sage, she was shocked by what happened yesterday, but her face was not as bright, and her complexion was not as bright as usual. That also made my heart clench. I left my daughter with my parents and immediately rushed to the police and told them what had happened. They told me that there was nothing they could do because they did not have enough evidence. Still, they said they would only ask my husband what happened. I decided to gather clues that my husband was the culprit. I went around asking neighbors if they had seen anyone suspicious. As my sister-in-law said, she found my husband was in a panic, but that was not enough evidence. I was unable to catch my husband, and my impatience and anxiety were building up. 2 days after the fire, when I left the office after work, my husband was waiting for me at the entrance. When he saw me, he approached me with a terrible look on his face, and I was terrified. I got into a nearby cab and left the place in a hurry. That night, I was so frightened by the memory of my husband's face during the day that I could not fall asleep. I was so frightened that I could not go back to sleep. I was so lightheaded that I went out to the hallway to drink some water. I heard my sister-in-law and her husband whispering in the living room. I was curious as to what they were talking about, and when I listened carefully, I found the content to be extraordinary. I didn't expect the fire to be extinguished so quickly. What are you going to do? We went to a lot of trouble to break into that house, but it's useless if more than half of it is still burned down. But we were lucky that Carson thought Nevada was the fire raiser. That's right. Carson trusts us completely. If we can frame Nevada for the crime and get him caught, won't she be willing to lend us the money? Oh, that's a good idea. I was horrified by this conversation and went back to my room to avoid making any noise. And he never thought that my sisters-in-law were the culprits. While I was confused, I received a call on my cell phone, and when I answered it, I found it was my daughter with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I saw," she said the day of the fire. When she came home from school, she saw my sister-in-law and her husband spraying oil all over the house, and they were talking excitedly about how they would get fire insurance if the house burned down. She got scared and ran away. "That's why I told you not to come home." She said that right after she called me that time, she panicked and ran away, afraid that my sister-in-law and her husband would find her. And she was confused because she could not believe that they, who had been so kind to her, would do such a thing. But she finally came to her senses and called me. I hung up the phone, soothing my daughter, but when I learned that my sister-in-law and her husband, whom I had trusted, were actually the culprits, my mind went blank. What was that word, Nevada? I suspected that my husband and his sister-in-law and her husband were working together. I decided to check the messages from my husband, which I had been too afraid to look through until now. Then I found several messages telling me to watch out for my sister. I immediately panicked and called my husband. "You finally answered. Carson, are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm at your sister's house." Hey, did you know it was them?" "Apparently, my brother-in-law recently made a mistake in the stock market. To make up the loss, he borrowed a lot of money and contacted us asking for a loan. But we didn't have that much money either, so my husband refused. After a while, his sister asked him what kind of insurance he had. I told her because she wanted to review her insurance policy. Then, while I was on a business trip, my sister called me and said, "If you get a lot of money, will you lend me a loan?" she said. "So they set our house on fire this time?" "I think so." My husband thought that his sister might do something, so he hurriedly left work and tried to go home. Then he received a phone call from me informing him of the fire, and he was so panicked that he asked. He was so flustered that he said something like, "Why are you still alive?" But then I remembered what my sister-in-law had said. "By the way, the day of the fire, your sister-in-law told me she saw you coming out of our house in a panic." "What?" The neighbors said the same thing. "What does that mean?" "Oh, that's because I left some materials for a meeting at home and rushed home to get them." When I was told, I remembered that my husband had been working on some documents until late the night before. In the first place, my sister said she saw me in my neighborhood at that time of night. I mean, why was she even in the neighborhood at that hour? It's true. I can't believe I've been so suspicious of you. I didn't even notice. I wanted to talk to you, but you blocked my calls, and when I went to your office, you ran away. I'm sorry. I suspected you. Anyway, it's not safe for you to stay with my sister's house, so get out of there right now. I hung up the phone, but my anger toward my sister-in-law and her husband began to rise. Looking back, they told me that block his phone. I can't believe that they set fire to my parents-in-law's house full of memories just for money. I can't believe that she tried to make my husband the culprit by creating scars in my daughter's heart. Passed around in peas, I will make sure they pay for the crime. I decided to stay with my sister-in-law for the sanctions so close to my heart. The next day, my sister-in-law and her husband, who had gone out since the morning, did not return home until the evening. I called them both into the living room and calmly told them, "There's something you're keeping from me, isn't there?" "Oh my God, Kirsten, what are you talking about? I have no idea." "Don't play dumb with me. I've been in touch with Nevada. I know everything. I know that you guys are in debt. I know that you set our house on fire." Then my sister-in-law grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled my face close to hers in a frightening manner. "Kirsten, I don't know what Nevada told you, but don't believe it. He's the one who did it, isn't he? He must be trying to round you up. If Carson believes him, he's playing right into Nevada's hands. We're also looking for evidence that he's the murderer." Disgusted by their words, I vigorously jumped away from the hand on my shoulder. I quickly thrust my phone at my sister-in-law, who was startled by this. "Can you say that after seeing this?" What I saw on the screen was my sister-in-law and her husband spraying oil all over our house. It also includes a perfect shot of them happily discussing the insurance money. In fact, my daughter, who witnessed it at the time, recorded the two of them on her phone. When my sister-in-law and her husband saw it, their faces turned pale. "This is not what it looks like. It's a misunderstanding, right, honey?" "Yes, that's right. Synthesis technology has improved recently. I think Nevada's trying to frame us. If we submit the wrong file, it'll be a distraction from the investigation. Now, give me your phone. I won't do anything stupid like handing it over after being told such a thing." I squeezed my phone. "I trusted you guys. Why did you even do this?" I still didn't want to admit that my sisters-in-law were the culprits because I knew how kind they were. But facts are facts, and I had no choice but to accept them. I glared at them. "You will be held accountable for what you have done. You've got to be kidding me. I told you it wasn't us." My brother-in-law was about to raise his hand in the air when I heard the door slam violently in my face, banging on the front door with the sound of the chime. While my sister-in-law and her husband were distracted by the noise, I ran toward the front door. When I opened the door, standing there was my husband and two police officers. I jumped into my husband's chest, and my brother-in-law, who was trying to escape in a panic, slammed himself into the officers. They tried to escape, but they were caught immediately. "Let go of me for a second. It wasn't me. My husband told me there was a better way to get money. I just went along with it. And screw you. You're the one who said we should do it because your family's house is old and the fire's going to burn fast." The cops grabbed them by the arm, and the two of them started cursing each other and blaming each other. My husband and I, as well as the officers, were simply appalled at the sight of them. "You guys are miserable at the last moment. If you have something to say, please go to the police and talk about it." I told them so, and they finally stopped talking and were taken away by the policeman. They were later arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for arson. I heard that they had an ugly fight to the end, trying to pin the blame on each other. I, on the other hand, was able to bring my daughter back from her parents' house and resumed our family life together. The house was partially destroyed in the fire, so we decided to take the plunge, sell the land. Perhaps because of the new environment, my daughter finally started to smile again. Now, I want to cherish this time when the three of us as a family can laugh together.